as some of you are laboring. I know you are. David Rauch is a housing expert and the CEO and founder of Protect Building Services since the mid-90s, I believe, 95, 96. His company has worked to improve the quality of life for communities coast to coast. First of all, David, good to have you back. How you doing?
I'm good, Rick. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm gonna pick your brain here for a second.
Okay.
This is coming in today from the Census Bureau. 3.8 million renters will likely be evicted in the next 8 weeks. Why the rental crisis keeps getting worse. For the first time ever, the median rent in the U.S. topped $2,000 a month in June. What that basically means, once you extrapolate it, those rising rents mean that households representing about 8.5 million people are behind on their rent. Where do 4 million people go if they get evicted in 8 weeks?
Well, a lot of them will have to scramble to find other housing. A lot of others will find housing at friends and family, but unfortunately, a lot will be thrown out on the streets. But I question that 3.8 million number.
Yeah, I'm just going by the new report just out by the Census Bureau. I've seen the housing market a couple of times in California, once in the Denver area. The housing prices went through the roof, and all of a sudden, every driveway had a new boat or jet ski or SUV in it, and then, of course, the bottom fell out, and they all went into foreclosure. Well, what about rents? What can people expect as far as if they're renting property?
Well, rents have gone up. Obviously, inflation is the biggest driver. That's causing everything else to go up. But remember, between 2000 and 2018, there were 70 million evictions, 3.8 million a year. To say that there's going to be 3.8 million evictions in the next 2 months, I think is a stretch. But we had those 2 years of moratoriums,
right,
federal and state, during the pandemic. And so there's a big pent-up demand that landlords need to straighten out. And that's going to result in a better, a greater than average number of evictions. But it's a sad situation. Unfortunately, every time there's a crisis, like the one you said in 2009 when we had the last real estate crisis, it's the poor folks that get hurt the most.
Sure. Yeah, at the other end of that financial spectrum, they don't get hurt as bad. They just make less. As I look at this, let me ask you something. I know that the federal government did this, this eviction moratorium and all that. Did that in the long term help or hurt the rental market?
Oh, it hurts terribly.
Okay.
Every time, especially the federal government, but any government goes to help a situation, it always backfires and turns around and hurts the situation. Because
right.
Now we're in a situation where we've got more than average number of evictions. They're messing with a huge ecosystem. Rentals and housing, house building and house rentals is, it's a fragile system. And every time the government steps in, it almost always messes it up.
Well, and I was talking to Steve Moore as a friend. He and Kudlow came up with Trump's economic plan. We talk about inflation. Well, you can't dump unearned money into the economy like we did with the stimulus check, one right after another, enhanced unemployment, and not expect to see, some flicker of inflation. And in some cases, even more than that. I'm just worried that we did the same thing to the housing market.
Absolutely, Rick. $46 billion was set aside by the government, federal government, in their stimulus packages to go to renters and landlords. Only half of that was given away. But if you think about it, the problem is that those folks that receive those benefits, they're less inclined to go back to work.
Yeah.
The landlords that receive those benefits are less inclined to fix their financials and fix their business. So all these and really that $46 billion does nothing more than do what you just spoke about, which is put all this cash into the system, and guaranteed that's going to cause inflation.
Sure.
And what happens? Who suffers during inflation? The poorest segments of our society who can't afford groceries and rent.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's true. Talking with David Rauch, housing expert, founder of the Protect Building Services. If you look at this, the rents are continuing to go up. I just told a story. I was talking to a friend earlier today, and they live around the downtown area, a pretty exclusive area, and what they were paying, I don't know, $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month for, now is up to $22,000. It's going to force people out geographically. But the combination of soaring inflation, the end of most, if not all, of those eviction moratoriums, and rental assistance payments, and it sounds like an oxymoron, but all of that put together, and it's pushing renters out. Since 2006, I guess, maybe later, rents have been going up quicker than home prices. But you're exactly right about low income. In the year before the pandemic, we had a shortage of 7 million affordable housing units for low-income renters. And by my calculations, and I'm no economist, but I can add 2 and 2 and usually come up with 4, it looks like we're headed in that same direction, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and you hit the nail on the head, and that is over-regulation by government that causes housing prices and rental prices to go through the roof. Look no further than California, and I know you used to live there. California is the most over-regulated housing market in the country. And why is Texas now the 15th most expensive rental market? Because of all the Californians that have moved there. And why is California so highly regulated? What is I call it the triple crown of self-inflicted wounds. Number one is, the regulations from the state, CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act. Any person, and especially the unions, can shut down a project, which means, the average builder has to wait 3 years just to get a permit.
Yep.
So if you look at California as the bellwether, it's a bad situation.
Yeah, well, let me, in the interest of full transparency, I never lived there. I worked there and made them fly me back and forth every 12 days for 16 years. But great for talk radio, but I wouldn't want to live there to save my life. And you're absolutely correct. I don't know how anybody makes a living building there. I had a friend that he was in heavy equipment, and one day we were talking, and he said, well, I'm out of the business, and he was very well known as a heavy equipment operator, and I said, well, what do you mean you're out of the business? Well, prior to that period of time, they had 6 different permits they had to get just to load heavy equipment and carry it a mile or 2 or 3 miles. Now they've doubled it with another permit. He goes, I can't even afford to load the equipment on trailers anymore. I mean, you're right. The triple crown of self-inflicted wounds, that's beautiful. That's exactly what they've got.
Oh, it's actually more than 3 things. You probably have heard of this inclusionary zoning. In California, you have to set aside at least 10% of every community that you build, apartment or for sale, for low-income housing, which means that you're basically building that for free. And that's one of the triple crowns. The other one is solars. Gavin Newsom, in his eminent wisdom, mandated solar for all new housing. Well, what does solar cost? Well, it seems to cost between $30,000 and $100,000 per unit. What's that going to do to the cost of a home or a rental?
No, David, you're absolutely on point. 48 hours after they voted to ban fossil fuel cars. And 48 hours after that, he comes out with a warning to California residents: please don't charge your electric car between 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. because the grid can't handle it. I mean, these people don't know what direction they're going in. David, what do you, last question. I know you stayed a little longer than you anticipated. For people that are facing increasing rents, they don't really know where to turn. Well, what should they do?
Well, I mean, it really starts with, getting your financial house in order. If you're renting a house, you're always 2 or 3 payments away from being thrown out on the street. And you've heard that 40% of American households can't put together $400.
Yeah.
So, when you're renting, you really have to get your financial house in order, which is another long conversation.
Yeah, you're right.
Ultimately, we have to get government out of the regulation of housing and allow the free market to release builders of homes and apartments to build more homes and apartments. That's the only thing that will bring down the cost of housing. Simple supply and demand.
There you go. It's not new. It's not sexy. It's just very pragmatic, and it's worked all this time. David Rauch, housing expert, CEO, founder of Protect Building Services. We appreciate it, David. Hopefully we can talk again soon.